All right, everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. We like to get into some pretty interesting stuff here, and today is no exception.
Yeah.
We're going to be exploring, well, the idea that society kind of wants us to be miserable.
Yeah.
Sounds a little out there, I know, but there's some surprisingly thought-provoking material that we're going to be looking at today.
It definitely challenges some assumptions.
It does, yeah, and that's, I think, what we're aiming for here, to see if there's any truth to this.
Right.
If looking at the world through this lens, this sort of, I don't know, cynical, maybe, lens, can offer any insights.
Mm-hmm.
So the material we're diving into claims that unhappy people are easier to manipulate and, ready for this, more profitable for certain industries.
Right.
I mean, are they suggesting there's some, mastermind group of CEOs sitting around, twirling their mustaches, plotting to keep us all down in the dumps?
Uh-huh. Not quite. It's more about how certain systems, like the beauty and fitness industries, are structured, they thrive on our insecurities. Like, think about those beauty ads. They point out flaws you didn't even know you had.
Yeah.
And then, of course, offer a product as the solution. It's all about making you feel like you need to buy something to be good enough.
Yeah. So it's like, hey, you're not good enough as you are,
Right.
but buy our product.
Exactly.
And maybe, just maybe, you'll inch closer to acceptable.
Yeah.
Sneaky.
And then social media, oh, forget about it.
Oh, yeah.
It's like a highlight reel of everyone else's supposedly perfect lives, all carefully curated to make you feel, well, inadequate.
Right, right.
The more we compare ourselves, the more we feed into the system. And in fact, one of the sources argues that true happiness, the kind that comes from within, actually poses a threat to these systems.
Yeah, because happy, confident people aren't as easily swayed by marketing, right?
Exactly.
They're not as likely to buy into the idea that they need X, Y, or Z to be happy.
Yeah.
Interesting. And, this idea of being programmed for misery, it might start even earlier than we realize. One of the sources argues that it begins in childhood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wait, are we talking about some Manchurian candidate type of situation here?
No. Nothing that dramatic. It's much more subtle. The source points to how we're often raised in systems where good behavior is rewarded, and then anything outside those lines is met with disapproval.
Yeah.
Kids learn to equate their worth with achievements and external validation.
Right.
One of the sources even mentioned how praise is often tied to achievement.
Interesting.
Teaching kids that their worth depends on external validation rather than, inherent value.
Wow, you don't realize how deeply ingrained that kind of thinking is until someone points it out.
Right.
Yeah. I'm starting to see how this programming could make it harder to find happiness as an adult.
It can definitely make it harder to break free from those patterns of seeking external validation. And even more, the source argues that obedience is often equated with morality, making it even harder to question the systems that might be contributing to our unhappiness.
Okay, so we're set up to be obedient, good little consumers.
Right.
Who constantly seek approval.
Exactly.
And then society throws in another curveball.
Yeah.
This whole concept of postponed happiness is like, work hard, get that degree, climb the corporate ladder,
Right.
and then you can finally enjoy life. It's all about delayed gratification.
Right. You hear it all the time. Suffer now, be rewarded later. And the source provides some, interesting examples of this.
Yeah.
Religion promises happiness in the afterlife. Education promises fulfillment through degrees. And the work world often dangles the carrot of a happy retirement after decades of toil.
So we end up chasing this elusive someday when happiness magically appears.
Right.
But what if that day never comes?
Exactly.
What if we spend our lives waiting for permission to be happy?
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of bleak, isn't it?
It can be. And it leads us to, well, a rather radical proposition from the source, choosing happiness now as an act of rebellion.
Oh, interesting.
It's about recognizing that happiness is a choice, not a reward that we earn by meeting, societal expectations.
So ditching the corporate grind to follow your passion for underwater basket weaving,
It could be.
is that the kind of rebellion we're talking about?
It could be. It's about aligning your life with what truly matters to you, even if it means going against the grain.
I like the sound of that.
Yeah.
But I can already imagine the raised eyebrows and judgment from people if you tell them you're quitting your stable job to, say, open a llama farm.
Right. There's definitely societal pressure to conform.
Yeah.
And happy people, people who forge their own path, They can be seen as threatening to the status quo because they're not playing by the same rules.
Right, because they're not contributing to the cycle of consumerism and discontent that fuels so many industries.
Right.
Huh. Makes you think, doesn't it?
It definitely does. And that leads us to, well, the characteristics of these happy rebels, the people who seem to have cracked the code to genuine contentment.
All right, spill the secrets. How do they do it? What makes them different?
Well, they're not bound by the same need for external validation. They don't seek their worth in, like, material possessions or other people's opinions.
Right.
Their happiness is rooted in something deeper, more intrinsic.
Okay, that makes sense. But how do you even get to that point,
Right.
It's easy to say, don't care what other people think. But in reality, we're social creatures, right?
Yeah.
We crave connection and belonging.
Yeah, the source isn't suggesting we become hermits and completely detached from society. It's more about, recognizing where those desires for validation are coming from and, whether they're truly serving us.
Yeah.
It's about, cultivating a sense of self-worth that comes from within rather than constantly seeking it from, those external sources.
So it's about shifting our focus inward, understanding our own values, and finding happiness in things that genuinely resonate with us rather than, chasing after things that society tells us we should want.
Precisely. And this can lead to some pretty unconventional choices. The source mentions, people who walk away from, like, high-paying but soul-crushing jobs
All right.
to pursue something that truly, lights them up, even if it means making less money or facing disapproval from others.
So if I decide to quit my job and become a professional dog cuddler, that's me being a rebel.
Maybe.
Okay.
It depends on your motivation, right? Are
Yeah.
you doing it because it genuinely brings you joy or because you're, trying to prove something to others?
Right.
True happiness comes from aligning your actions with your values,
Yeah.
regardless of, those external pressures.
Okay, that makes sense. But let's go back to how society benefits from our misery for a second. It still feels a bit abstract to me.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give me some concrete examples?
Sure. Think about the pharmaceutical industry.
Okay.
The source highlights, the increasing reliance on antidepressants and anxiety medications. And while these medications can be helpful, the source kind of questions whether our increasing dependence on them points to a deeper societal issue.
Like maybe we're medicating the symptoms of a system that's
Yeah.
designed to keep us stressed and anxious.
Exactly. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a broken bone.
Right.
And it's not just limited to, mental health. Think about the pressure to achieve the perfect body fueled by the fitness and diet industries.
Oh, yeah.
We're constantly bombarded with messages about how we're not thin enough, not toned enough, not young enough.
Right.
It's a recipe for, well, constant dissatisfaction.
Yeah, it's like we're on this like never-ending treadmill, always striving for something
Yeah.
that seems just out of reach.
Yeah.
And all the while, these industries are profiting from our insecurities.
That's the point the source is trying to make. It's profitable to keep us feeling like we're not enough. The more insecure we feel, the more likely we are to buy products and services that promise to, fix us.
It's kind of a vicious cycle, isn't it?
It is.
But if we're like trapped in this system, how do we break free?
Right.
The source mentions happiness as rebellion,
Right.
but what does that even look like in a practical sense?
Well, the first step is awareness. Recognizing these patterns, understanding how these systems operate.
So paying attention to those like sneaky marketing messages, those societal expectations that tell us who we should be and what we should want,
Yeah,
becoming more mindful of those external pressures.
exactly. And once you become aware of those influences, you can start to question them.
Okay.
Ask yourself, are these beliefs truly my own? Or are they just echoes of societal programming?
It's like we need to deprogram ourselves from all the messages we've absorbed over the years,
Right.
Sounds like kind of a daunting task.
It can be, but it's a process, not a, one-time event.
Right.
And the source offers some guidance on how to navigate this, process.
Okay.
One key point is to focus on internal validation rather than seeking it externally.
So learning to value ourselves for who we are rather than what we achieve or what others think of us.
That's the idea. It's about connecting with your, authentic self, identifying your values, and living in alignment with them.
Which might mean making some tough choices, walking away from careers that drain us, relationships that no longer serve us, or societal expectations that feel suffocating.
Yeah. It's about choosing your own happiness, even if it means deviating from, the norm.
Right.
And sometimes that's the most rebellious thing you can do.
Okay, I'm starting to get the picture.
Hmm.
But it's also important to acknowledge that this path isn't always, sunshine and rainbows.
Right. Of course.
And we're back, ready to wrap up our deep dive into this idea of happiness as rebellion. So far, we've explored how society often profits from our misery and how we're constantly bombarded with these messages that make us feel inadequate.
Right.
But as we've learned, there's another way,
Yeah.
a path less traveled where happiness isn't a destination,
Right.
but a choice we make each day.
Exactly. And this path, as the source suggests, often leads us away from those conventional markers of success that society values so highly.
Yeah.
It's about, defining success on our own terms.
So ditching the fancy car and McMansion for a life filled with purpose and genuine connection,
Yeah.
what we're talking about?
It could be. It's about recognizing that true happiness isn't found in, accumulating things or
Yeah.
achieving a certain status, but in living a life that's, aligned with our values brings us a sense of deep fulfillment.
Okay, I'm getting that. But how do we even begin to, shift our perspective like that?
Yeah.
How do we break free from those, deeply ingrained societal expectations that we've been talking about?
Well, the source emphasizes the importance of awareness, as we've discussed.
Yeah.
It's about paying attention to those internal voices that tell us we're not good enough, not successful enough, whatever, enough.
Right.
And then asking ourselves, where did those beliefs come from?
Right.
Are they really true, or are they just echoes of, societal programming?
So it's like we need to become detectives of our own minds,
Yeah.
uncovering those limiting beliefs and challenging them.
Exactly. And as you start to dismantle those beliefs, you can start to replace them with more, empowering ones,
Yeah.
beliefs that support, your authentic self, your unique gifts and talents.
That makes sense. But it's easier said than done,
Yeah.
right? I mean, changing deeply ingrained beliefs can feel like an uphill battle.
Yeah. It's definitely a process, and it takes time and effort, but it's a journey worth taking. And as the source reminds us, self-compassion is key. Be patient with yourself. There will be setbacks, moments of doubt, but it's about progress, not perfection.
So no beating ourselves up if we catch ourselves falling back into old patterns of thinking.
Exactly. It's about recognizing those patterns, acknowledging them, and then gently redirecting ourselves back to a more empowering path.
Okay, that's reassuring. It's good to know it's okay to stumble along the way. But what about the reactions of others? As we talked about earlier, choosing happiness as an act of rebellion can sometimes, ruffle some feathers.
Right.
People might not understand why you're choosing to do things differently.
That's true. And you might face judgment, criticism, or even resistance from people who are, invested in you staying on the conventional path.
So what's the best way to deal with that? Should we try to convince them to, see our point of view?
It's not about converting others to your way of thinking. It's about honoring your own truth and living
Yeah.
in a way that feels authentic to you, regardless of, external opinions.
Okay.
Remember, true happiness is an inside job.
Yeah.
It doesn't depend on other people's approval.
Wow, that's powerful. So it's about finding that inner strength to stay true to ourselves even when it feels challenging.
Yes. And as you embody this sense of authenticity and choose happiness on your own terms, you might be surprised by the ripple effect it creates.
What do you mean?
Well, your courage to live authentically might inspire others to do the same. It might, plant seeds of possibility in their minds,
Yeah.
helping them to see that there's another way, a way that leads to genuine happiness and fulfillment.
So by choosing our own happiness, we're not only liberating ourselves, but we're potentially contributing to a shift in consciousness,
Mm-hmm.
a movement towards a world where authenticity and well-being are valued above all else.
Exactly. It's about creating a world where happiness is not a privilege, but a right that's available to all.
That's a beautiful vision. It's incredibly inspiring. It's a reminder that our choices, even those that seem, small or personal, can have a ripple effect that extends far beyond ourselves.
It's about recognizing the interconnectedness of all things.
Great.
And understanding that when we choose happiness, we're contributing to a collective shift towards a more joyful and fulfilling world.
Well, on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground here, explored some challenging ideas, and hopefully sparked some new insights along the way.
It's been a pleasure exploring these concepts with you. And remember, the journey towards authentic happiness is ongoing.
Yeah.
It's about continuous self-discovery, growth, and a commitment to living in alignment with our values.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, listeners. We hope this conversation has inspired you to question those limiting beliefs, to embrace your authentic self, and to choose happiness as an act of rebellion, one joyful step at a time. Until next time, keep diving deep.